Hola y bienvenidos a nuestra clase Se Habla Español. Welcome to our Spanish class. We are so glad that you have chosen to join us in this introductory Spanish course. Yo me llamo Kathleen.
Y yo me llamo Carlos, y nosotros somos sus profesores de español.
Learning a new language takes time and effort, but we hope that our course will guide you through the first semester of Spanish and the basic elements of the language. In each module, you will see a variety of activities, such as grammar lessons, new vocabulary, a review section called Práctica, as well as lessons on aspects of the Spanish-speaking culture.
There are many reasons to learn a new language, and Spanish is one of the most popular second languages to learn. Learning a new language opens new doors and will give you insight into another culture. The culture of the Spanish-speaking world is extremely diverse. Spanish is spoken in North, South, and Central America, as well as in Europe and some parts of Africa.
By learning Spanish, you will also be able to communicate with over 400 million people throughout the world. But you don't need to travel very far or even leave the country to practice speaking Spanish. In many cities throughout the U.S., one can find places such as Old Town San Diego, where the culture and the language of Mexico are vibrant and alive. Old Town San Diego is considered the birthplace of California. San Diego is the site of the first permanent Spanish settlement in California. It was here in 1769 that Father Junipero Serra came to establish the very first of the California missions. In the 1820s, a small Mexican community of adobe buildings was formed, and the community was given the title of El Pueblo de San Diego. Today, in the city of San Diego, there are markets, restaurants, and neighborhoods where you can appreciate the fountains, archways, and tile work of Spanish architecture, hear the music of mariachis, and enjoy the foods that are native to the Americas and today's Spanish-speaking populations. In every major U.S. city, you will find neighborhoods where Spanish is spoken and the culture is celebrated.
There are approximately 28 million Spanish speakers in the United States, making Spanish the second most common language spoken in the U.S. After Mexico, Spain, Colombia, and Argentina, the U.S. has the fifth largest Spanish-speaking population in the world. There are 21 countries where Spanish is spoken as the official language. And that brings us to the name of our program, Se Habla Español, which means Spanish is spoken. Where is Spanish spoken in the world? Se habla español en Argentina, se habla español en Perú, se habla español en Puerto Rico y en Cuba. Vamos a ver dónde más se habla español. Okay?
Muy bien.
All right, so we're going to look at some maps, and we're going to talk about the different countries where Spanish is spoken.
Muy bien.
Okay?
Let's
and
start
some
with
regions.
let's start with the European continent.
Okay, vamos a empezar con
¿Dónde
España.
se habla español?
En España se habla español.
Muy bien.
Okay, muy bien.
Bueno, Spain is a very diverse country in itself. Most people in Spain do speak Spanish, but they speak other languages as well.
Correct. They speak in Catalunya, in the area around Barcelona. They speak Catalan, which is a different language. In the area of Pamplona and San Sebastián, in the Basque region, they speak Vasco. And then in La Coruña, they speak another language,
Gallego.
Right? Gallego. Okay, so yes, not only Spanish. Spanish is the most predominant and it's the official language, but they speak other languages too.
So different regions have their own regional languages. Is it true to say that most Spaniards are bilingual?
Not all.
Not all.
No.
Some people don't have a regional language.
Correct. Some don't. Yes. And historically, I mean, Spain is very much similar to England in that the English came to the U.S., they settled, they brought their culture, their language, and Spain brought their culture, language, and religion to the Americas. They brought it to Mexico, to Peru, to different regions within Latin America.
Yes.
And they were invaded too by the Moors.
That's right. There were a lot of people living in Spain before the Spaniards even came to the Americas. Who were the Moors?
The Moors, the Arabs. So they settled in Spain for close to over 700 years, over 7 centuries. And you can see that influence, especially in the southern region of Spain, in Andalusia, in the area of Córdoba, Sevilla, Granada, very close to the African country of Morocco. the African continent, and you see the influence everywhere in the architecture, in the people itself. So it's
the food, the
music. Yes, very present in that area.
Muy bien.
So,
what is there to do in Spain today? What do young people or travelers
cosas.
do in Spain?
Okay, in Spain there are many places to visit, many things to see, and of course Madrid, being the capital of Spain, is one of the most exciting capitals in the world, and so there's a lot of activities to do there, a lot of nightlife for people that like that, the type of activity.
Sure.
There's among the best in the world. But there's also amazing museums. One of my most favorite museums in the world, El Prado, is in Madrid.
El Museo del Prado.
And they have paintings by El Greco, which is my favorite painter. They have Velázquez, and very close to there is the Museo de la Reina Sofía.
Oh, it's the Modern Art Museum.
The Modern Art Museum, where they have paintings of Picasso and
Dali,
and
Miro.
Yes, many artists. So Madrid, plenty to do. You can catch football, soccer games, football.
Football.
That's
the national sport, isn't it?
That's the national sport, correct. Correcto.
And bullfights as well. That's probably second on the list.
Sí. And have you been to Barcelona?
I've been to Barcelona,
Okay.
sí.
¿Y
Muy
qué
bonito.
te parece?
Oh, es una ciudad muy bonita, ¿sí?
Okay.
This beautiful city has a lot of different architecture styles. What's the name of the very famous architect?
Gaudí.
Gaudí.
Yes. And the architecture of Gaudi's architecture is present throughout the city, from La Sagrada Familia, which is the cathedral, the church that still is under construction.
How many years? Many years
Oh,
it's been under construction.
I believe the early 1900s or late 1800s, and it will not be completed for another 10 or 15 years. So yes, and there's parks, there's apartment buildings that were all designed by Gaudí.
By Gaudí.
So yes, the culture is there. His influence is there everywhere.
Muy
Okay.
bien.
All right.
Bueno,
Vamos a
México.
América. A
Sí,
México.
a las Américas.
Muy bien. Okay. So like we said earlier, the Spanish came, they settled, and Mexico became one of their most important possessions.
Yes,
okay,
it was.
as a colony, because of, for many reasons,
Natural resources.
natural resources and the cultures that were present there, the labor,
The manpower.
manpower, and so Mexico became known as Nueva España.
Nueva España. Muy
The
bien.
new Spain. And so they brought the culture, they brought the language, and they brought the religion, okay?
But
So-
really what we see in Mexico today is a combination of what the Spanish brought and what the indigenous cultures already were
Correcto.
that
Es
were
un
here.
mestizaje, an influence of the different cultures, the European plus the native
The indigenous cultures.
So within Mexico, you even have different accents, different dialects. You have over 80 different languages spoken in Mexico.
So again, there are more languages spoken in Mexico besides Spanish.
Correcto, yes.
And these are native languages, indigenous
native languages, yeah, like Nahuatl and Maya. So there's many. And of course, Spanish is spoken everywhere. But there are a lot of people that are bilingual, even trilingual. They speak more than one language. Okay, and so the places to see in Mexico. There are so many different types of tourist sites that you can visit, from pyramids to the most amazing beaches in the world. A lot of fascinating things to do. ¿Qué lugares conoces? What places do you know?
I know Cancun, ¿verdad? And Cancun I think of as the honeymoon spot because so many people love to go to Cancun for vacations, beautiful beaches of the Yucatan. I think it's one of my favorite places in Mexico. When I think of Mexico, I also think about the food. Probably my most favorite of all the foods of the Latin American countries come from Mexico. And that's very diverse when we talk about food. The food in the north and in the south are all different, aren't they?
And again, the food has so much influence from the indigenous people and European too. But we rely on corn. We rely on native vegetables and fruits that were native to the area, to the Americas. So,
and there's some very interesting foods that come from Mexico. Chocolate, for example, right?
okay.
Something that the whole world appreciates today is native food from Mexico.
Exactamente. All
Muy
right.
bien.
So,
Shall we go to another part of the world?
Centroamérica y el
Bien.
Caribe. Okay.
Centroamérica y el Caribe. Not all of the Caribbean countries speak Spanish.
No, but of course Cuba, being one of the largest
Cuba.
islands, speaks Spanish. You have Puerto Rico,
Puerto Rico, a territory of the United
States, and República Dominicana,
Muy bien.
of course, speak Spanish. And then in Centroamérica, you have, of course, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. Guatemala has a big Mayan influence in the country. So and Nicaragua, of course, and Costa Rica and Panama. And I've been to Costa Rica, which is a fascinating country. It's beautiful. A lot of natural parks, which the country has
the most national
the
parks.
most national parks probably of any country in the world. So it's beautiful there. And Panama, of course, the biggest attraction there is the Canal de Panama.
Muy bien, the famous Panama Canal.
Panama Canal. And during the construction, a lot of people don't know this, but people were brought in from many parts of the world, from China, from Jamaica, from different areas. So
to build that canal.
To build the canal. So in Panama, you have this cultural mix
diversity.
that is very, very interesting.
Muy bien.
So,
okay.
All right, vamos a Sudamérica.
A Sudamérica.
Okay,
Muy bien.
perfecto.
South America.
So in South America, again, huge region. And of course,
yes.
There are some countries where they don't speak Spanish, like Brazil, which they speak Portuguese. But then the rest of it, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, Spanish is spoken everywhere. And a lot of those countries, especially in the Andean region, in the Andes region, they speak other languages too, like Aymara or Quechua, which are native Guarani. And the Incas had a huge presence in that region. So, and Argentina, again, huge country.
And there were a lot of immigrants from Italy and that region of Europe that came to Argentina.
From Italy, from Germany, from France, from Spain.
So we tend to see very fair-skinned people
more
in
European
that
influence.
southern cone. And we also see a lot of influences in the language, some different expressions and a little bit different accent in that part of the world.
Yes. Okay, and the same thing with Uruguay. It's very similar to Argentina. Okay, and I've been to Peru. Peru is just a beautiful country.
Oh, tell us about
Culture
Peru.
is fascinating. So, and actually in one of our classes, we will talk about some of the festivals there in Peru. But it's just a beautiful, beautiful place to visit. So I plan to go back soon.
Muy bien. So after speaking Spanish, you'll be able to join us and visit all of these interesting places. See?
Yes.
So now let's talk about some of the things you can do to be successful at learning a new language. The first step is to lose any fear you may have about making mistakes. Of course you will make mistakes. It is part of learning. The only way to learn to speak Spanish is to practice speaking. Use every opportunity to speak and don't be afraid of sounding funny or making mistakes. Some people believe that it's impossible to learn a new language in adulthood. I had a chance to interview a friend who shared with me some good advice about how you can approach your language studies. Let's take a look. Hello, we've invited to our studio today Lee Kirchhoff. Lee is here to talk with us about how an adult learns language. Hola, Lee.
Hola.
I'd like to talk to you about some of the myths and misconceptions that people have about how a language is learned. I learned Spanish as an adult, and I know you did as well. What are some of those misconceptions?
Well, I think the most common misconception is that adults can't learn a second language. There's a widespread belief that after a certain age, our brains are simply incapable of absorbing another language other than the one we've learned as children, and therefore there's no point in trying to learn a second language because you're 20 or 30 or 40. It's just impossible. I think that's a really damaging myth because it discourages people from even making the effort to get started. And it's clearly not true. I know many people in their 20s and 30s who've learned a language, a second language, and have made great progress. Last time I was studying abroad, I met a couple in their 70s who had started to learn Spanish and had made great progress. So I think that's a really important myth to be aware of. Another myth that is similar is that the myth that some people are just naturally gifted at languages and they don't have to work at it, and everybody else has to struggle. Clearly, there are people who struggle with learning languages, and there are people who advance very quickly. But I think the common denominator among people who do advance very quickly is that they're very diligent. They study, they work at it every day, they practice it. And by doing that, it can seem as though you are a natural language learner because you can make very rapid progress.
So it's really all about the effort that you put into it.
I think so, yes.
So in what ways can we put effort into learning language? What are some practical or everyday ways to get good at a language?
Yeah, that's the key idea is to make an effort that is effective. And I think one way to do that is to start reading in the language as quickly as possible. Even beginners in a language can read, for example, children's books that are written for very young children. and make progress, learn vocabulary, learn grammatical structures in a kind of a natural way. But the advantage we have as adults over children is that our minds are much more sophisticated. So our progress is usually much more rapid. And so, for example, I think an adult learner who is diligent can progress through the grade levels of Spanish texts probably at the rate of 1 year every month, and by the end of a year of diligent work can probably be reading at the high school level of a native speaker. So I think that's one important way to speed one's learning of the language. Another way, and this is the advantage that we have here learning Spanish in the United States, is that we can take advantage of the large Hispanic speaking population that's here and interact with people. That's the best way to activate your knowledge, because you're engaging with people who are native speakers who can correct you. And the best thing you can do when you're trying to speak a language is to make mistakes. Because when you make a mistake and then you're corrected, you'll never forget it. You'll remember it forever. If it's on the page and you're trying to remember it, you may not, depends. But if you make a mistake and you think about it, it'll stay with you. So I think activating your knowledge by interacting with people, taking advantage of all the media resources we have in the United States is also important. There's lots of Hispanic TV stations throughout the United States. Every major metropolitan area has a Hispanic radio station. And now with the internet, it's possible to listen to radio stations from around the world, or to download even TV shows. And I think this is really important for people who are learning Spanish, because the one thing you soon learn by exposure to the world of Spanish is that there's more than one kind of Spanish in a way. And that the way they speak in Argentina, for example, is very different than the way they speak in Spain, or in Mexico, or in Los Angeles, or in New York, in Brooklyn. So by exposing yourself to all of these different varieties, they're all similar, they all have the same foundation, but they expose you to the richness of the language, and that broadens your experiences of it, I think, in a really important way.
Any other suggestions about ways we can learn a language?
I think one of the most important things you need to do is you need to work at it every day. You need to do at least something productive in your studies every single day. What I often say to people is that it's more important to study 10 or 15 minutes every single day than it would be to study 4 hours 1 day a week. It's a much more efficient use of your time, and you'll learn more in the long run than simply trying to do it all at one time. An analogy I often use is to exercise. People like to exercise to build their muscles and to get strong and to build their bodies. But people who exercise never get to the point where they're in perfect shape and then they can stop. If you do, you start to deteriorate. It's the same thing with languages. The more you work at it, the better you get. But if you don't work at it, you will start to lose it, and you'll start to deteriorate in terms of your facility with the language. So I urge people to practice as much as they can, to do something every day. Read something, study a point of grammar, watch a TV show, listen to the radio, do something to keep going forward. Second thing I would advise people is that a language learner has to constantly review. Even when you're in advanced or intermediate stage, I think it's really important every once in a while to kind of go back to the beginning and study the basic structure of verbs and the basic structure of prepositions, adjectives, the formal grammatical aspects of language, because you'd be surprised how easy it is to start to make mistakes because you're not sure about the fine points. And the more you go back and review, the easier it gets, the quicker it gets, and the more it helps you to speak correctly, and that, of course, helps you to learn more.
What about grammar? Students are often scared by grammar. What do you think about learning grammar and the importance of grammar in language learning?
I'm a big fan of grammar. I think it's really important. It can be overdone. I remember years ago when I was first learning German, which is the first language I acquired after my native language. When I was learning German, it's a different language than Spanish. I spent too much time studying grammar. I only studied grammar. And that was important, but it didn't help me to function in the language. It didn't help me to build my vocabulary. Whereas in Spanish, the grammar is somewhat less complicated than German, but still I think grammar is important. There's a common way that some people try to learn a language, and that is, oh, I'll just throw myself into it. I'll just immerse myself in the language. And that works for some people, but I think for the most part, that can be a very frustrating experience because it's overwhelming. If you know grammar, at least a little bit, it gives you a structure. It gives you a sense of, okay, I don't know maybe what that word is, but I know it's a verb, and I know it's functioning in this way. And so that will help you to learn it down the road if you know what part of speech it is. But also I think it gives you a framework in which to think and organize your learning of the language.
These are wonderful points. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for sharing them with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Bueno, we'll be back in the studio now. I hope you have learned some wonderful tips to help improve your language skills, and learn Spanish.
Those were great ideas. I have had many students who believe that they are too old to learn a language, but that is not true. Some of my best students are older adults who really dedicate themselves to improving their language skills every day. It is very helpful to find places where you can practice speaking Spanish. For some students, it is with a neighbor or Spanish-speaking friend. Other students find it easier to practice Spanish when they are in a restaurant or a market. Wherever it is, the most important thing to do is to practice a little bit every day.
Every language instructor has lots of good ideas and suggestions for how students can learn and improve their language skills. We have asked a few people to share some of their recommendations with us. Let's take a look.
I would recommend that students practice their learning outside the classroom and that they do this on a regular basis. In the United States, there are many television programs and radio programs available in Spanish, and I believe that they should take advantage of this opportunity to practice their listening skills.
To learn a new language, students need to be surrounded by people who speak that language that they want to learn.
I recommend to the students, based on my own experience, to immerse completely into the language. For example, I recommend using sticky notes labeling things in your house. If you forgot, make sure you place it again, the sticky note, on the item that you don't remember.
I like the idea about the sticky notes. Tell
That's
me,
a
Carlos.
very good idea.
How does it work?
Okay, so you label things at home
Okay.
with the little sticky notes, and you place it on whatever object you want to learn,
Okay.
vocabulary words, for example. So this would be computadora.
So
you write
computadora.
on one of the sticky notes,
Okay.
la computadora, or el ordenador, and you stick it on. And you label different things, different items. And so the objective is, every time you see this object, you will look at the sticky notes and try to remember the word.
Muy bien.
And once you've memorized it, then you're free to take it off.
I
because
see.
you already know it.
Muy bien. So I could remember that you are el profesor.
El profesor.
And after I've practiced that and I've remembered it, then I can take off the sticky note and I'll know
Because you've learned it, you've memorized
el
it.
profesor. Muy bien.
And then the ones you have left, you know you have to place more importance on those, and you have to memorize
And
it.
if I forget what it is, then I go ahead and I put the sticky note
you
back
can
on.
put it back.
Muy bien.
Correcto.
Buena idea.
Okay.
So what are some other suggestions? Let's wrap
All
up
right.
and summarize some of these good suggestions we've heard from the
Very
teachers.
good.
and
We've seen
people.
a few, so let's look at some of these.
Okay.
Okay, vamos a ver. And the first one is don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's a very big one. A lot of students don't want to say anything until they speak perfectly, and of course that will never happen.
They feel intimidated, and especially in classes or when they go to restaurants, they feel intimidated because they feel they're going to make a mistake and people are going to laugh at them.
And that's not true.
That's not true.
Muy bien.
And even if they do, who cares?
That's right.
That's the only way you're going to learn.
You have to make mistakes in
People
order
made
to learn.
fun of me when I was learning English. And English is my second language. So,
And how did you learn? Just by continuing to practice?
yes, but people laughed at me and that's how I learned.
Okay.
Okay?
That's a good
Yeah.
one. Number one.
All right, the second, practice every day.
And this is one that was mentioned earlier, where it's very important to practice a little bit every day. It's more important to practice 10 minutes every day than to wait and practice for 2 hours on just 1 day per week.
Correcto. And practicing not only means doing your homework and, reading your book, but also going out and practicing with friends, with neighbors, like we said earlier. A few things per day
Finding people
will
to
do
talk
a lot.
to.
Yes,
Good.
correcto.
Okay.
All right, tercera. Find someone to speak with, which is the third one,
Right.
okay? You have to find someone. And in every region in the U.S. now, there's Spanish-speaking populations everywhere.
That's true.
So it's no longer an excuse that, I don't have any Spanish-speaking friends. Well, chances are you do.
Yeah, and chances are you'll find someone if you really look.
Correcto.
That's a good one.
Muy bien. La cuarta, start reading right away.
This is a good one because many people believe that they need to wait until they get to a certain level to start to read. But there are books published for children in Spanish, and you can start right away by reading stories, or even read stories that you already know in English, read them in Spanish, and you'll associate the new vocabulary with the story you already know.
And people don't have to buy them. They can go to the public library and check out books for children in Spanish and read them. So it's gratis.
Okay.
All right, let's look at some more. Watch TV in Spanish and the radio too. Okay,
That's right.
Muy importante. But TV, there's 2 networks, Spanish networks in the U.S. There are 2 Spanish networks in the U.S. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention the names of them, but there's 2, and they're available pretty much everywhere, on satellite, on cable, and over the air. So they're free. So watch the news, watch the soap operas, watch the sports. It's going to help.
Yeah, and it helps to choose something that you like to watch and watch those things. If you love sports, watch sports in Spanish.
Correcto. Okay. Radio. Okay.
Lots of radio stations and lots of different kinds of music. Some people think that Spanish music has one particular sound, but that's not true. There's all sorts of music in Spanish.
Correcto.
And listening to music helps people to learn sometimes. You memorize words.
Exactamente. Muy bien. Review what you have learned.
Very good. Don't just keep continuing to move forward. Go back and look at things from previous chapters. Review things you've studied before.
Constantly. Okay. And our last one is immerse yourself in language as much as you can.
And that just means surround yourself. Do everything you can to be surrounded by Spanish.
Okay. Muy bien. And again, like we told you, Spanish is pretty much everywhere
In
here
the United
US.
States, we're very fortunate that we have lots of places to practice, lots of people to practice with. The culture, the food, the music, everything is around us.
Yes. And so that brings us to a close. This is the end of our first class, and we hope you will join us for our coming classes. Okay. Que tengan un buen día y nos vemos muy pronto.
Muy bien, hasta pronto.